And we've got one more talk to keep it up today. Closing out our presenters is Grace Chi, who is going to be taking us home with a talk that I have been looking forward to, I think, since we got the proposal. It's answering an age-old question that I think we love to debate about in CTI, which is about sharing. I've worked at places where share recklessly, share everything, share with anyone. And I've worked at companies where, like, if you think about work when you leave the building, you will get fired. And I think a lot of those are just based off of instinct and what people have done. And I love that we're going to have Grace come and bring us some actual data and insights about these human aspects of CTI. So Grace, let me know when you are up and running. We will get controls over to you.
I'm good to go. Let's see if I can click on the screen. There you go. All right, we're good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my talk, Is Sharing Caring? A deeply human study on CTI networking. We're almost at the end, so thanks for staying on. I'm so excited to unveil my findings for the very first time today. It was just released publicly. A link to the full report is available in my Slack hallway if you're in there, and I'll share the URL to the report on slide at the end as well. So don't worry about missing any visuals. Get a drink of water, stretch your legs. I'm standing myself, and we're going to have a fun time. Before we dive right in, let's talk about how I got here. My name is Grace Chi. I'm co-founder and COO of PulseDive, which is a threat intel data and platform startup. I'm also a huge fan of overly stressful board games and an artist on the side. So a big shout out to Ashton. Everyone jump over into that, I think, number 9 channel and just drop her some love for all the notes that she's taken so far. I've always had an interest observing the people, the process, the technology dynamic, and the human component even more so in cybersecurity. Being at PulseDive, it means that I have the privilege of working with teams and individuals all over the world at all levels of program maturity. And from there, you really get to observe traits for success, both in the short and the long term. The first real spark, though, for this topic began about 12 months ago at last year's CTI Summit. I had started embedding myself more deeply in the community. I got invited to a few trust groups that I didn't even know existed. And I was starting to grow this awareness of how different players were already interacting in this essential way, but that was really obscure, that I didn't know about. And that tipping point to really get started, like doing this, putting pen to paper, was when a specific Bob Ross and Weatherman impersonator compelled me to put myself out there with content that I cared about, that others would benefit from. When I watched CTI Summit, I was like, yeah, I'll present in like 10 years when I'm ready. And so that's why I'm here today. So that's the crux of today's topic. Having a conversation with all of you asking, hey, what's so important about networking and CTI to do your job? And what can we do to improve it? Cyber threat intelligence is a growing space. There's an industry-wide consensus that teams cannot effectively operate in an intelligence silo. You hear this like a lot, phrased in a lot of different ways. You've probably heard it a bunch of times in the last 2 days as well. And in support of improved CTI sharing, stakeholders have invested research and development around areas like cross-boundary collaboration, not just from the government, but industry partnerships, legal initiatives. Standardization, that's making sure you're speaking the same language within and across. Things like MITRE ATT&CK framework and the sticks and taxi technical standards come into play here. Measuring trust is another one. There's some really interesting academic work about how you can manage and measure trust between peers, and also reporting best practices. These are all important. Yet there's a lack of clarity around how professionals can most effectively network today. The conventional wisdom to date is that like CTI networking is achieved through trial and error and then on an individual basis. So I set out with the objective of benchmarking how different methods stack up, how and why individuals participate at all, and then the role that organizations play. One thing to note here is outside of scope were things that were not directly related to CTI work. So it's great if you're networking, but it didn't matter if it was for a new job, getting a promotion, or closing a sale. And I also didn't want to get into the waters of specific tools and technologies because I wanted everyone to be able to chime in, no vendor conflicts. and leave a different space for that discussion. This research is intended as a starting point. The goal in sharing this knowledge is to encourage intentional, inclusive, and strategic approaches around CTI networking as an asset and not as an afterthought. And the key insights today has a little something for everyone. It's kind of wide range, from management trying to help understand what the barriers are and the best practices, how they can become influencers and connect this to their program, to new entrants looking to demystify what colleagues are doing and like how to even get started, what it looks like. And to do this, we reached out directly to CTI professionals. A bunch of you in the Slack channel probably submitted a response. Quantitative data was collected through a Google Forms survey in November, December of last year. No personal information was required to submit, and no compensation was offered. And I know that the survey link was distributed through things like social media posts, direct messages, some trust groups, some ISACs, newsletters, and some others that I'm not aware of. Qualitative data, on the other hand, was gathered in open-ended survey questions, as well as however I could reach you. So one-on-one with yours truly, emails, messages, phone calls, video chats. And I wanted to just stop here and say a big thank you to everyone who put in that time and sent in a response. And not only sent in a response, but put in really thoughtful answers, even the optional questions. And while by no means is this comprehensive, together we've already established a foundation that we can now build off of. So we can ease in first by taking a quick look, very quick, into who responded to the survey. We had a good spread of job functions and overall experience. CTI was the primary job function for over half of the respondents, and an assortment of other related roles making up the other half: security ops, incident response, executive leadership. These are pretty expected proportions, and even the same order that Samara had listed as her Intel partners in a previous talk, so validated. While the years of total experience were evenly represented, over half of respondents reported less than 5 years of CTI direct experience. And this is consistent with the relative recency and the growth of the field, drawing in experienced talent from career pivots as well as specializations within the field of security overall. Most respondents were overwhelmingly from for-profit organizations, and there's kind of two branches here. The first branch is in-house cybersecurity teams, so think enterprises, banks, institutions. And the other half was by cybersecurity providers of any sort. So that includes vendors, professional services, and consulting. I did hope to get a larger government response, but during the survey itself, I came across some resistance, and also, even though it's an anonymous survey, some rejections from the ability to participate when they asked within their team. But on the for-profit side, employers of all sizes are represented. Geographically, respondents were heavily skewed towards North America, making up over 2/3 of all respondents. It was a survey in English. We did some international outreach, but North America dominated. However, the respondents did operate in multiple regions. Half reported working in at least 3 regions, and a quarter reported being very global, working in all 7 regions listed here. A small digression, I had to put this in. I asked a question about job satisfaction, wondering if there might be some correlation between some survey question and satisfaction ratings, and I really had no idea what I would find. But so many of you are so gosh darn happy that I couldn't make a segment out of it. Satisfaction was high across all segments and subsegments, and in that 71% you see that's satisfied and highly satisfied, about half were highly satisfied. And so I didn't have enough people that responded who were unhappy peers, and that made me happy. I hope that makes you happy. It was interesting, though, to see that there was a small dip in satisfaction ratings for those working at 10 to 100,000 employees. It's still pretty high, but if that rings true to you, if you have research that you can cite, can you share it in Slack? Because personal curiosity. All right, let's jump into our findings. You happy campers. So the first research angle dove into how different CTI networking methods stacked up. And don't worry about reading like the details on the slide. These are just graphics that I pulled from my report. In this section, I sought to define the level of participation across 7 channels, like private, invite-only peer-to-peer trust groups, social media and public forums, one-to-one direct messages, industry events, volunteer groups, paid membership groups like ISACs and dark web. Then I asked about perceived quality. Was this method valuable, high confidence, unique, timely? And finally, I looked at the results. Not all of them are shown here, but I asked things like, did this method help detect an attack? Did it provide value during an attack? Did it contribute to remediation? Did it help you share resources to work on something you couldn't do alone? And what we found out came on top is that there are no shortcuts to the strongest networks. This is not something that happens overnight, and this is not something that is ever completed. The level of participation, the perception of quality, and results, they were all consistently leading for the kind of traditional one-to-one direct messages and to trust groups. And this dominance was observed across all subsegments too. As private channels, this highlights that difficulty in scaling trust. Both are heavily ad hoc, they're based on your personal reputation and all about reciprocated contributions. And some other tidbits here that might be interesting to the folks in watching, 100% of respondents working in the largest employee orgs reported regularly using one-to-one DMs. And professionals with 10 plus years of total experience rated one-to-one higher on all fronts compared to those with less than 10 years, which totaled up is a 46% difference. For trust groups, they ranked high across all quality metrics except uniqueness. So you'll see when there's the news of the day, there's some echo chambering, a lot of like repeated conversations. And most trust groups are hidden and they kind of have obscure vetting systems until you're already in on the other side. A rare few like Curated Intelligence, who I talked to, they maintain a public presence to share useful TLP white intel to benefit the global community. But either way, most are started in a pretty grassroots manner with peers who know each other, a spinoff from another group or they work together, and then they grow around a niche focus area for collaboration. Ultimately though, you have to know a few someones, not just someone who will want to invite you, but then a couple other someones who will vouch for you. In qualitative responses, many respondents noted a reliance on trust groups in particular, and enthusiasm for establishing more trust communities too, even though time is limited, and you'll learn that that's one of the biggest barriers. These groups do offer expert working commentary and can save a lot of effort and help provide a lens onto everything that's happening. And then small note, those with 10 plus years of experience and those with CTI primary job functions, they rated trust groups more highly. And this brings to light how more senior and more specialized practitioners have both the access and the ability to leverage these communities. But don't underestimate social media. Is it noisy? Yes. Is it chaotic? Yes. Is it frustrating? I mean, if you ask me, I say yes, but it remains popular for a reason. While social media and public forums fall short across multiple dimensions of quality, it ultimately outperformed when you were assessing impact. Respondents, they shared anecdotes about the strengths of channels like Twitter, like Reddit, like LinkedIn for discovery, not just including meeting strangers around shared research topics, but also being contacted for their niche expertise that they were broadcasting out over time. And in addition to short-term projects, these connections led to deeper relationships outside of social, right? So like, how do you get to the DM? How do you get to a trust group? You meet people. Social media is one of those venues, so is going to events, so is volunteering. Most users rated social media as highly valuable and very timely, while simultaneously having very, very low scores of confidence. An interesting note here is that there was a single open-ended answer that said that the highest confident data comes from following quality vendors and researchers on social media. There was one person who said that. And I think the key advice that I was gleaning from the data here was that you need to have a system in place. You need to know how to tightly moderate and curate your feeds, know what you're looking for, because at best it's a little distracting and it gets worse from there. So to help everybody here, drop in your favorite quality intel account from social, or a list, a group, a thread in the chat if you have it. And also, if you want, for social media, make some new connections if you're comfortable by checking out the business card swap channel in the summit. All those links, I think, are going away in a couple hours, so make sure you grab them before they're gone. So these 3 channels came out on top. If you use 1 or 2 or all 3 of these on a weekly basis, I'd love to drop in a note about what your secret formula for success is, or what your frustrations are, really. Moving on to the second section, it was all about how and why individuals network. Here, once again, no need to read this. I sought to define the benefits, the activities they were engaged in, and the personal opinions and outlook. And what we found is that CTI networking was viewed as an important source for action and awareness. Respondents had high levels of agreement in ingesting and acting on various types of content. And that content might be about getting valuable threat data, staying aware of what's happening strategically, taking proactive measures, finding and vetting new sources and methods. And the success stories that were shared in the open-ended section span from the micro, like a single detection, something that they escalated overnight that came through a network, to campaign and incident level response support, to, at the macro level, collaboratively and continuously building a landscape with multiple vantage points of their peers together over time. I have some stories, some quotes below that illustrate this variation, but you'll get the slides later. Don't worry about reading it right now. The statements that I had regarding working with others, feeling less like a silo, they had more moderate levels of agreement, around 55%. And that really demonstrates that value placed on concrete, actionable, timely networking with outcomes that you can do something with. And when you're contributing and participating, keep that in mind too. This one was a really fun one. I asked individuals to rank certain items from what's provided the most to least value. And no one argue, but feel free to have constructive conversations about this. But all levels of the often debated data, info, intel spectrum, they ended up on top compared to things like support or advice, emotionally, technically. But which level depends on who you ask. The left showcases the ranking across all respondents, and respondents with primary CTI job function had the same exact ranking, so I didn't replicate that here. A note is that as the years of direct CTI experience increase, the value of contextualized information also correspondingly increases. But then when you break it out by different functions, like raw data was particularly controversial. It's kind of middling overall, and then it jumps to first place in incident response, then to dead last in security operations. So we're hearing some trauma from the SOC, like echoing in this presentation. And then it stays quite low for executive leadership. Contextualized information, on the other hand, starts off right at the top, like we talked about. Then it drops to tied for second last in incident response, back up to the top for security operations, and then dropping into second place for executive leadership, coming second only to processed intel. And I think, Rick can probably confirm here that we could have all bet money that intel would have been #1 for leadership. Those with the least and the most years of experience valued advice more highly. And so, this reflects a couple different reasons for advice. Either you're starting off, you're learning the ropes, you're settling in, or you're doing a lot of work and you're relying on your trusted network to work on specific challenges. Small orgs place more value on raw data. Large orgs place more value on the advice and opinions of others, which does make sense because 100% of them are regularly participating in one-on-one DM. And this kind of feeds into something that I didn't quite expect when I was going in. It was not part of my hypothesis, but I found the survey's strongest consensus in the statement, CTI networking is important for team members of all levels. Out of all the questions asked about participation and opinions, everything like that, this statement had the highest level of agreement. It was 91% overall, and the more senior segments went up to 93%. This tied to an unexpected barrier that I didn't even include in the survey, and a handful of qualitative respondents noted that their biggest barrier was related to personal fear. Imposter syndrome, feeling unknowledgeable, feeling too new, not being able to contribute more. But then on the flip side, about half, so that's like 50, maybe even up to 80 people who offered advice addressed this. So we're going to take a little bit of a data intermission and look at the advice themes that I pulled out. It's to participate, it's to be trustworthy, it's to always be strategic. It is a lot of words. This is actually against my own best practice, but while I was working on this presentation, I found it so much more powerful to quote real people, and some of you might have actually written this that's on the slide now. So quickly going over some of these. To participate, have both human and automated interactions in mind. Start small, share what you can, start with people you trust, find a good community of people you like that respect you, and then just share what you can. And don't let imposter syndrome stop you. And then find and follow people on social media or through any other method that are already working and interested in those target areas that you're looking to get into and do more. And if, fill yourself, surround yourself by these voices. And if you see something and they're doing a good job, also let them know. Building trust. Don't earn trust ever. It is so hard to build, it takes time, and it's so easy to destroy or at least erode. Make sure you have good practices, that you are you have high professional standards, you're being a good analyst, you have good critical thinking, you have conclusions based on sound principles. You're going to get into top circles, and you're going to get attention by contributing your own intelligence, not just regurgitating. There's nothing wrong with retweeting, there's nothing wrong with sharing stuff that's already out there, but that won't differentiate you or add value to you, build trust to you as a person, as much as doing your own work and sharing that out. And speaking to that, provide value with the niche you're experienced in. We all don't know how to do a lot of stuff, and that's okay. If you can translate across 3 languages really quick, if you can write a script to save everyone a heck of a lot of time, if you can communicate so well that you get those end stakeholders to do the thing that your team wanted them to do, these are all values. And as you kind of build those muscles up, and as people know they can come to you, you in turn can also go to them to get stuff to fill in your gaps or things that you're working on. Finally, please be careful and strategic. Understand what your organization needs. I don't need to beat the drum again, we've heard it a lot, but if you're gonna go out and you're gonna network, know what you're looking for, know how you're gonna collect it. Know once you collect it, what you're gonna do with it, because data on the floor is useless. It's a waste of time for everyone. And trust but verify who you're talking to. Whatever you're sharing, understand that that goes with the level of how much you vetted them. And I really appreciated this one. Be skeptical with data shared, but please be generous to those who share it, as it can take a lot of courage. It can be something very novel. I think it's like what Garrett had said, where you're not going out there saying, I hate your face, this was bad, and you should feel bad, because that's a waste of both people's times, honestly. If you're going to provide constructive criticism, if it's worth your time to do that, go in with the intent to improve and not to demean. And understand it can be kind of terrifying. Finally, select trust groups based on impact, and not just trust groups, really anything you're doing in terms of networking. If you're struggling to find value, like test things out, try things out, but just move on. Your time is limited. Don't overstretch yourself with things that are not paying off for you. And so this is just a snippet of the individualized advice by and for this community. And then finally, I explored how CTI networking fits within the job and the organization. I asked questions about barriers, processes, organizational culture. And newsflash, there's not enough time in our day. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me here. Most respondents reported dedicating time each week to CTI networking, even though they say that they don't have the time. 61% had at least some standards in place or highly standardized processes for what they collected. Despite this, only a quarter of respondents measured or reported on the effectiveness of their networking efforts. 2/3 reported that their biggest challenge was having no time. And another top two of the issues included policies around sharing and legality. These are external forces that are preventing sharing. Noisiness and the ability to bring in useful, actionable data is absolutely a barrier. I've included it here, but the conversation around that started to deviate towards what we define as out of scope in terms of technologies and standards. And these challenges too deviated from general CTI surveys looking at team barriers, which were more focused on budget and lack of talent. Here, it's about pressures and things that people were not able to do that they wanted to do. And looking at another lens, what we found, pretty unsurprisingly, is that the strong encouragement and support that happens at that individual level is lacking at the organizational. We just talked about how enthusiastic people were to get more participation, to have others participate. And then when at the end of the day, though, it's mostly on you and between two people. CTI networking directly supports items like information sharing and strategic awareness that you find in cybersecurity maturity assessment models. Yet there's a significant contrast between the highly positive individual statements like, I encourage those who report to me to participate. It's important for my job. It's a part of my time. And neutral organizational sentiments in the middle here with statements like, I'm rewarded for participating. It's easy to get new methods approved. It's well-defined or it's structured in my area of work. One note, though, is that while in-house and security vendors, the two large for-profit sectors or demographics that responded, they shared the same level of individual sentiment, those working for security companies revealed slightly more positive sentiments on the organizational side, about 10% further over to the right. Given the benefit to organizations resulting from individual participation, this is a key area for development. Maturity, strategic, operational planning, they all benefit from, one, acknowledging the role that CTI networking is already playing, and two, incorporating those efforts within the program. From there, organizations can create structures, remove some barriers within reason, and duly reward efforts. So let's summarize the top insights and take a quick look ahead. I know we covered a ton of data here. The research serves as a starting peek into the nebulous, jumbly, even secretive world of CTI networking and its impact. When we looked at how different methods stacked up, the crowd favorites of one-to-one DMs, peer-to-peer trust groups went out like by far as the most favored methods across participation, perceived quality, observed results. And if you want to be a community player in threat intel, build your network and pipeline with these top methods in mind. Social media and public forums, if they shouldn't be underestimated, they outperformed on results when compared to perceived quality and landed in third place. However, have a system in mind and focus on what the results are that you're looking to get. When we looked at how and why individuals participate, data, information, intelligence, they're all important and for different people at different levels. Key advantages included access to and awareness of actionable, timely content. So when you're contributing, when you're offering things, think about it through that lens as well. That will be rated as more valuable. And it's really not a matter of if you should, there was no controversy around that, but how. There's a high level of value, of encouragement placed on CTI networking for all levels. And we took a little intermission, data intermission, to cover some key advice by and for all of you to participate, to be trustworthy, and to always be careful and strategic. And then finally, looking at the role that organizations play, for the most part, it's pretty much on you. Organizations are currently lacking in structures and incentives around CTI networking and integrating that with plans. And even though this type of networking for your work is directly related to security posture, is directly related to CTI programs and results, it's mostly seen as a personal undertaking. And it's time to acknowledge impact on CTI programs as an asset and not as an afterthought. So with this initial benchmark, I hope to push the field towards more effective, inclusive, and strategic CTI networking efforts and lay the ground floor for what's going on. Looking at where I would go from here, a larger survey, first off. This research, it had a lot of limitations, right? The survey was done with a grand budget of $0, my own time and dime, and Dan, my co-founding partner's support. He's in the chat too, so feel free to bug him. It would be really great to see a more representative sample size, not just by like a larger volume, but employer types, international representation. I might need some translators for that, to be honest. Second, inclusive and exclusionary culture. That got a ton of interest since the very beginning. I got a lot of questions before, during, and after I was working on these drafts. And this would explore, the name of the game, these 2 days, the impact of biases, of groupthink, and other prejudices that are hindering networks and creating barriers to building the diversity that benefits us all. Several biases were already touched on by other presentations with other lenses, but that really applies to networking as well. Third, guidance by career levels. Let's dig deeper into the different requirements and approaches for individuals at entry or mid or senior career stages. And then finally, a direct follow-up from our last section, company case studies. Do you work with a company that plans with networking in mind? Has it been done? How did you fight over sharing efforts and restrictions with parent organizations? Here we'd research attempts, both success and failures, if I can find them, of org strategies that somehow tied CTI networking to program maturity, plans, operations. Here are some sources that help me define and refine this research, and I'll share this deck and list with all the attendees as well. So I am so glad, checking my time, I'm still good. I'm so glad you joined my talk today, covering the current state and the potential of networking in CTI. The full report can be found with this link. If there's findings, additional insights, data summaries, and it's also shared in the channel. I pinned it earlier. If you heard something in this talk that you're excited to use, if you are sharing something in your next team meeting, if you have a burning question, if you have 2 cents that you'd like to donate into my opinion coffer, please do shoot a note in the Slack or send a DM. And for those who are asynchronous or not in the Slack, my contact information is also at the bottom. So I'm really excited to hear from you, and I'm happy and excited to continue building off of this baseline.